I'm Noelle Andrews, 32, a pediatric nurse who spent years believing I wasn't worthy of real love. On my 30th birthday, as I sat alone in my studio apartment with a grocery store cupcake, my ex Marcus sent me a text that shattered what remained of my confidence. Happy birthday to someone who'll die alone. No one could ever love your broken pieces. I cried myself to sleep that night, convinced he was right, but 18 months later, everything changed. The engagement ring on my finger caught the light as I posted the announcement, me and David, radiant and genuinely happy. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. Marcus again. This time, his message was different. Congratulations, I guess. Can we talk? What he didn't know was that my transformation hadn't just been about finding love. It had been about discovering a strength I never knew I possessed. And the conversation he was about to have would reveal truths that would change both our lives. Forever Dodd, if you've ever felt unseen or betrayed by someone who claimed to love you, this story is for you. The grocery store cupcake sat on my kitchen counter like a monument to my loneliness. Vanilla with artificial blue frosting, the kind a child might pick out, not a woman turning 30. I grabbed it from the discount rack on my way home from another exhausting 12-hour shift at the children's hospital, telling myself it was fine, that celebrating alone was a choice, not a circumstance. My studio apartment felt smaller that evening, the silence pressing against me like a weight. Through the thin walls, I could hear my neighbors, the young couple next door, laughing over dinner. Their joy a sharp contrast to my solitude. I turned 30. 30 years old, and the most meaningful relationship in my life was with my patients' parents, who thanked me for caring for their children while I went home to an empty apartment. Every night, the cupcake's single candle flickered. As I made a wish, I was too embarrassed to say aloud, "Please let this year be different. Please let me matter to someone." That's when my phone buzzed. Marcus. My heart actually lifted for a moment. Maybe he remembered. Maybe he cared enough to acknowledge the day. We'd been broken up for 8 months, but some pathetic part of me still craved his validation. His message loaded, and the words hit me like ice water. Happy birthday to someone who'll die alone. No one could ever love your broken pieces. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The cupcake sat forgotten as tears dripped onto my phone. Each word felt calculated to hit exactly where I was most vulnerable. Marcus knew my fears. I'd shared them with him during those late-night conversations when I thought we were building intimacy. He knew I worried about being unlovable, about the childhood wounds that made me cling too tightly and give too much. I screenshot the message before I could think better of it, as if I needed proof of his cruelty. Then I did something I should have done months earlier. I blocked his number. My hands shook as I navigated to his contact, as if deleting those digits would somehow delete the history between us. The cupcake went into the trash, still unbitten. I couldn't celebrate anything after that. Instead, I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, letting his words replay in my mind like a toxic lullaby. Die alone. Broken pieces. No one could ever love. That night marked the end of something, though. I didn't realize it yet. It was the last time I would let Marcus Rodriguez define my worth. But in that moment, curled up in my empty apartment with tear-stained cheeks, I felt like the loneliest person in the world. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a strange sense of clarity. I was tired, not just sleepy, but soul deep, exhausted from carrying the weight of his judgment. As I got ready for work, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me deserved better than grocery store cupcakes and cruel text messages. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding for months. I called my sister Emma. "Noelle? It's 7 in the morning. What's wrong?" "I think I need help," I whispered, and for the first time in years, admitting weakness felt like strength. Marcus Rodriguez had been everything I thought I wanted when we met 3 years earlier. Confident, successful, the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. I was 27, fresh out of a string of disappointing dates, and his interest in me felt like validation that maybe I was worth pursuing after all. Our first date was at an upscale restaurant. I'd never been to the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the waiters wore actual ties. Marcus ordered wine without asking what I preferred. explaining the vintage to me like I was a student in need of education. At the time, I found his confidence charming. Looking back, I see it was the first red flag I chose to ignore. "You're different from other women," he told me that night, his hand covering mine across the white tablecloth. "Most women are so high maintenance, so needy. But you're self-sufficient. I respect that." I glowed under his praise, not realizing he was setting the terms of our relationship from day one. I could be wanted, but only if I never needed anything. I could be loved, but only if I remained convenient. The early months were intoxicating. Marcus showered me with attention, expensive dinners, weekend trips to his family's cabin in the mountains. He introduced me to his friends as his nurse, never just Noelle, as if my profession was the most interesting thing about me. When I mentioned feeling reduced to my job title, he laughed it off. "Don't be so sensitive," he said, his arm around my shoulders at yet another work function where I knew no one. "You should be proud of what you do. It's noble, simple but noble." Simple. The words stung, but I swallowed my hurt and smiled. Marcus was a senior marketing executive at a tech startup, and his world felt glamorous compared to my shifts at the hospital. Maybe I was being too sensitive. The subtle erosion of my confidence happened so gradually I barely noticed. Marcus had opinions about everything: my clothes. "That dress is a little tight, don't you think?" My friends. "Emma seems jealous of what we have." My interests. "Pottery classes. That's kind of a waste of money when you're not naturally artistic." He never yelled or name-called. Instead, he wielded disappointment like a scalpel, precise and cutting. When I got excited about a promotion opportunity at work, his response was measured. "That's great, babe. Just don't let it go to your head. Hospital politics can be brutal, and you're not really the competitive type." I didn't get the promotion. I told myself it was because I wasn't qualified, not because I'd stopped advocating for myself. The love letter I found months after we broke up, crumpled in the back of a drawer he'd forgotten to clean out, told a different story entirely, written in his careful handwriting but never sent. It revealed the man he might have been if he'd been brave enough to be vulnerable. "Noelle, I watch you with your patience, and I'm amazed by your strength. You hold their pain like it's precious. Like it matters more than your own comfort. I wish I could love like that. I wish I wasn't so afraid of needing someone the way I need you. You deserve better than my fear, but I don't know how to give you more without losing myself." Reading those words 2 years later broke my heart in a different way. He'd seen my worth, but his own insecurities had turned that recognition into resentment. Instead of growing into the love I deserved, he'd systematically diminished me until I matched his limited capacity for connection. The breakup itself was almost anticlimactic. After 2.5 years together, Marcus sat me down in his pristine living room and delivered the news like a performance review. "This isn't working for me anymore," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You've become too dependent, too needy." I feel suffocated. I think we both know this relationship has run its course. I'd been blindsided. Yes, we'd been struggling, but I thought we were working through things. I'd been trying so hard to be less needy, to take up less space in his life while somehow remaining present enough to matter. What did I do wrong? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "It's not about right or wrong," he replied, already standing up, already moving away from me. "We're just not compatible. You need more than I can give." He was right about that, but not in the way he meant. I needed a partner who saw my emotional needs as normal, not burdensome. I needed someone who celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them. I needed love that didn't require me to shrink myself to fit into someone else's comfort zone, but I wouldn't understand that for months. In that moment, sitting in his living room while he packed my things into a neat pile by the door, I only felt the crushing weight of another failure. Another person who'd found me lacking. The birthday text 8 months later was just the final cruelty in a relationship that had been slowly killing my spirit all along. But it was also, though I didn't know it yet, the catalyst that would force me to finally choose myself. The weeks following my 30th birthday blurred together in a haze of 12-hour shifts and takeout containers. I threw myself into work with a desperate intensity, volunteering for extra shifts, staying late to finish charts that could have waited until tomorrow. At the hospital, I had purpose. I mattered to my patients and their families. It was only when I went home that the emptiness crept back in. Emma called every few days, her voice carefully casual as she checked in. "How? Are you doing really?" She'd ask, and I'd give her the same answer. "I'm fine. Just busy with work." We both knew I was lying. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the birthday incident. I'd been assigned to care for a 7-year-old girl named Sophie who was recovering from appendix surgery. Her mother stayed with her, around the clock, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, holding her hand through every moment of pain. "You're so lucky to have such a devoted mom," I told Sophie as I checked her vitals. "She says I'm her most important job." Sophie replied with the matter-of-fact wisdom of children. Something about those simple words shattered the careful walls I'd built around my grief. I excused myself and barely made it to the supply closet before the tears came ugly, desperate sobs that felt like they'd been building for months. I wasn't anyone's most important job. I wasn't anyone's priority, their first thought in the morning or last worry at night. Marcus had made sure I understood that I was temporary, replaceable, fundamentally lacking in whatever quality made people worth keeping. That night, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 2 hours, unable to face going home to my empty apartment. Other nurses walked past, heading to their own cars, their own lives, and I wondered if any of them could see how completely lost I was. When I finally drove home, Emma was sitting on my doorstep. "Your neighbor let me into the building," she said, standing up as I approached. "We need to talk." "Emma, I'm exhausted." "No." Her voice was firm in a way I'd rarely heard. "You're not fine, and I'm not leaving until we deal with this." Inside my apartment, Emma surveyed the scene with poorly concealed alarm, takeout containers stacked on the counter, laundry piling up in corners, the general air of someone who'd stopped caring about their environment because they'd stopped caring about themselves. "When was the last time you cooked a real meal?" she asked. "I don't remember." "When was the last time you called a friend?" "I've been busy." "When was the last time you did anything that made you happy?" The question hung in the air between us. I couldn't answer it because I couldn't remember. Somewhere in the process of trying to become what Marcus wanted, I lost track of what I wanted. Emma sat beside me on my worn couch, the same one Marcus had always complained about. "I love you," she said simply, "but I can't watch you disappear like this." She pulled a business card from her purse, crisp white with elegant silver lettering. "Dr. Sarah Chen, licensed clinical psychologist." She's who I saw after my divorce. She changed my life, Noelle. Let her help you too. I turned the card over in my hands. "I don't need therapy, I just need to get over him." "This isn't about getting over Marcus," Emma said gently. "This is about remembering who you were before him, who you still are underneath all the pain." The business card sat on my nightstand. For a week before I finally called, Dr. Chen's office was warm and welcoming, filled with soft lighting and comfortable furniture that invited honesty. But I sat rigidly in the chair across from her, arms crossed, defensive. "What brings you here?" "Today?" she asked, her voice kind but direct. "My sister thinks I need help," I said, as if that absolved me of responsibility for being there. "What do you think?" The question caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked what I thought, what I needed, what I wanted? "I think." "I'm tired," I admitted, and something in my chest loosened. "I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough for anyone, including myself." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about that feeling." And for the first time in months, I told the truth. I told her about Marcus, about the birthday text, about the years of slowly shrinking myself to fit into his narrow definition of acceptable. I told her about lying awake at night, wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't seem to inspire the kind of love I saw other people sharing. "You know what strikes me most about your story?" Dr. Chen said when I finally stopped talking. "You keep asking what's wrong with you, but you haven't once questioned his behavior. Why do you think that is? It was the first question that would crack open everything I thought I knew about love, worth, and what I deserved. But sitting in that safe space with someone who listened without judgment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I'd been told. Dr. Chan assigned me homework after our third session. Keep a journal of my thoughts and feelings, but with a specific focus on distinguishing between my authentic voice and the internalized criticism that sounded suspiciously like Marcus. The first entry was painful to write. Asterisk, today I spilled coffee on my scrubs before work, and my immediate thought was typical Noelle. Can't even handle simple tasks without messing up. But then I caught myself. Since when do I call myself typical Noelle, like it's a bad thing? That's Marcus's voice, not mine. The real me would have laughed it off and grabbed a new set of SCRUBS. Asterisk week by week. Page by page, I began to excavate the woman who'd existed before Marcus decided she wasn't enough. The process was like archaeological work, carefully brushing away layers of accumulated criticism to uncover something authentic underneath. I discovered I'd abandoned painting because Marcus once commented that my landscapes were nice, but not really gallery worthy. I'd stopped suggesting restaurants because he always had somewhere better in mind. I'd even changed the way I laughed softer, more controlled after he mentioned that my natural laugh was a bit much for professional settings. You've been performing yourself, Dr. Chan observed during one session. But who are you when no one's watching? That question sent me on a journey of rediscovery. I started small, buying groceries I actually wanted instead of what I thought I should want. I picked up a novel from the romance section without the shame Marcus had trained me to feel about frivolous reading. I painted again, messy watercolors that captured light in ways that made my heart sing. Regardless of their gallery worthiness, the biggest revelation came when I was going through old photos. I found pictures from before Marcus and me at Emma's wedding, laughing with my head thrown back, completely unself-conscious. Me at a work picnic, covered in finger paint from playing with the children, radiating joy. Me hiking with friends, sweaty, and triumphant at a mountain summit. In every photo, I looked alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The woman in those pictures was confident, genuine, unafraid to take up space. She was someone I wanted to know again. I wrote in my journal. That night, asterisk, I wasn't broken when Marcus met me. I was whole, maybe imperfect, maybe still growing, but fundamentally complete. He convinced me I was a renovation project, but I was already at home. Asterisk, the nursing award certificate Emma found while helping me reorganize my apartment became a symbol of this shift in perspective. I'd shoved in a drawer after Marcus's lukewarm response when I'd received it 2 years earlier. This is incredible, Noelle, Emma said, reading the citation. Excellence in Pediatric Care, nominated by both colleagues and families. You never told me about this. Marcus said it was nice, but not really a big deal, I murmured, embarrassed by how easily I dismissed my own achievement. Marcus was an idiot, Emma said flatly. This is a huge honor. You saved children's lives, provided comfort to families in their darkest moments, and your peers recognized you for it. How is that not a big deal? I looked at the certificate with new eyes. The families who nominated me had written comments about my compassion, my skill, my ability to make their children feel safe during frightening times. These weren't small accomplishments. They were the things that made life meaningful. That weekend, I framed the certificate and hung it in my living room, right where Marcus's pretentious abstract art print used to hang. Every time I walked past it, I remembered I was good at what I did. I made a difference. I mattered. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult session where Dr. Chun pushed me to examine my pattern of seeking validation from people who were incapable of giving it genuinely. You've been trying to earn love like it's a prize. You can win through perfect behavior, she said. But love isn't a reward for being good enough. It's a gift freely given between people who appreciate each other as they are. But what if who I am isn't worth appreciating? The question came out small and scared. What evidence do you have for that belief? I started to list Marcus's criticisms, but Dr. Chun stopped me. I said evidence, not opinions. What concrete? Evidence suggests you're not worth appreciating. I sat in silence, searching for proof of my inadequacy. Instead, I found memories of patients who hugged me before discharge, colleagues who sought my advice on difficult cases, friends who called me when they needed support. I found evidence of competence, compassion, reliability, humor, all the qualities that made someone not just worth knowing, but worth treasuring. I think, I said slowly, I've been looking for evidence in all the wrong places. That night, I wrote the longest journal entry since I'd started therapy. Asterisk, I'm Noelle Andrews. I am 30 years old and I am not broken. I have survived childhood, trauma, put myself through nursing school, built a career helping heal children, maintained friendships despite a toxic relationship trying to isolate me, and found the courage to seek help when I needed it. I am resilient, empathetic, intelligent, and funny. I have work to do on myself, we all do, but that work is about growth, not fixing fundamental flaws. Asterisk, asterisk, I deserve love that doesn't require me to audition for it daily. I deserve a partner who celebrates my successes instead of minimizing them. I deserve to take up space in the world without apologizing for my presence. Asterisk, asterisk, Marcus was wrong about me. But more importantly, I was wrong about me. And that ends now. Asterisk, reading those words felt like coming home to myself. For the first time in years, I looked forward to discovering what came next. 6 months into therapy, I began to understand the difference between existing and living. The woman who had celebrated her 30th birthday alone with a grocery store cupcake had been merely surviving, moving through her days without joy or purpose beyond work. But as I peeled away the layers of Marcus's influence, I discovered an appetite for life I'd forgotten I possessed. The first major change was my living space. I'd been tolerating my studio apartment because Marcus had convinced me it was practical and financially responsible. But I realized I'd outgrown both the space and the mindset that had chosen it. Using money I'd been hoarding out of fear-based scarcity, I moved to a sunny one-bedroom apartment with hardwood floors and large windows that let in the morning light. Emma helped me decorate, and together we created a home that reflected who I actually was rather than who I thought I should be. We hung my paintings on the walls, not just the new ones, but the older pieces I'd rescued from storage. We filled the space with plants that thrived under my careful attention, books that sparked my curiosity, and photographs that captured genuine moments of joy. The nursing award certificate held a place of honor above my desk, but it wasn't alone anymore. I'd added other acknowledgments I'd previously dismissed, thank you cards from families, a certificate of completion from a pediatric trauma course I'd taken, even a silly participation ribbon from a hospital charity run. Each piece told the story of a woman who showed up, who tried, who made a difference. At work, my newfound confidence created a ripple effect. I volunteered to mentor new nurses, sharing knowledge I'd always possessed but had been too insecure to offer. I spoke up in staff meetings, contributing ideas for improving patient care protocols. When the head nurse position opened up in our unit, I didn't just consider applying, I actively campaigned for it. I've been watching your transformation, my supervisor, Janet, told me during my interview. You've always been an excellent nurse, but lately you've become a leader. The other nurses look to you for guidance, and you've stepped into that role beautifully. I got the promotion. More importantly, I celebrated it properly this time dinner with Emma and my close friends. A small party in my new apartment. Genuine. Pride in my accomplishment. No one minimized my success or suggested I was getting ahead of myself. The people who truly cared about me wanted to see me thrive. The social changes were perhaps the most significant. Marcus had isolated me so gradually. I hadn't noticed until I started rebuilding those connections. I reached out to college friends I'd lost touch with, joined a book club at the local library, and even signed up for a pottery class despite having no natural artistic ability. The pottery class became particularly meaningful. My hands, so steady, and sure when inserting IVs or comforting frightened children, were clumsy with clay at first. I created lopsided bowls and crooked vases that would never be displayed in any gallery. But every imperfect creation represented something Marcus had tried to take from me, the right to be a beginner, to fail, to find joy in the process rather than perfection in the result. "Your pieces have such character," said Margaret, a retired teacher who sat beside me each week. "They're not technically perfect, but they have heart. That's what makes art meaningful." I thought about her words as I painted a wonky ceramic mug in shades of blue that reminded me of the ocean. Marcus would have pointed out its flaws, but I saw only the meditative peace I'd felt while creating it, the satisfaction of making something with my own hands, the simple pleasure of choosing colors that made me happy. My social circle expanded in ways that surprised me. The book club introduced me to literature I might never have discovered alone. Everything from literary fiction to science fiction to memoirs that made me laugh and cry in equal measure. I found myself looking forward to our monthly discussions, to the different perspectives and insights my fellow readers brought to each story. Through pottery class, I met Sarah, a social worker who shared my passion for helping others heal. We discovered we both loved hiking and began exploring local trails together, conversations flowing as easily as our footsteps on mountain paths. These new friendships weren't based on convenience or shared trauma, they grew from genuine compatibility and mutual interest. The financial changes were subtler but equally important. Marcus had made me feel irresponsible for spending money on anything he deemed unnecessary, so I developed a scarcity mindset that kept me from investing in my own happiness. With Dr. Chun's help, I learned to distinguish between frivolous spending and legitimate investments in my well-being. I bought quality art supplies, enrolled in a continuing education course that would advance my career, and yes, I purchased books instead of always relying on the library. I learned to view these expenditures not as indulgences, but as investments in the person I was becoming. The most profound change was internal, a shift from seeking external validation to developing internal compass. I no longer needed someone else to tell me I was worthy. I could feel it in the way I moved through the world. I spoke up when I disagreed with someone instead of automatically deferring. I said no to requests that didn't align with my values or priorities. I took up space without apologizing for my presence. One evening, as I sat in my living room reading a novel while my latest pottery creation dried on the windowsill, I realized something remarkable. I was happy, not the desperate, clinging happiness that depends on someone else's mood or approval, but the quiet, sustainable contentment that comes from building a life aligned with your authentic self. I picked up my journal and wrote, "Today I realized I don't need to be rescued anymore. I've rescued myself. I've built a life I genuinely enjoy, surrounded myself with people who appreciate me as I am, and learned to trust my own judgment. Whatever comes next, I'm ready for it, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm whole looking back." I can see that this period of rebuilding wasn't just about recovering from Marcus's damage. It was about becoming the woman I might have been all along if I never learned to doubt my own worth. I was finally ready for the kind of love I deserved, though I had no idea it was already walking into my life. The coffee shop where I met David wasn't particularly special, just a cozy neighborhood place called Bean There, with mismatched furniture and local art covering the walls. I'd started going there on Saturday mornings as part of my new routine of treating myself to small pleasures. I'd order a lavender latte and sit by the window with whatever book my book club was reading, letting the weekend unfold at its own pace. I noticed him before we actually spoke. He was hard to miss, tall and lanky with dark hair that always looked slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it while concentrating on something important. He had a regular spot at the corner table where he'd spread out papers and type intently on his laptop, occasionally pausing to stare out the window with the kind of focus that suggested he was working through a complex problem. What struck me most was how comfortable he seemed in his own skin. There was no performance in his solitude, no checking his phone every few minutes or glancing around to see who might be watching. He was simply present with his work, occasionally smiling to himself when he'd apparently solved whatever puzzle he was wrestling with. Our first interaction was embarrassingly mundane. I was leaving after my usual morning reading session when I tripped over the leg of his chair, sending my empty cup clattering across the floor and nearly landing in his lap. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I stammered, scrambling to collect my things while my face burned with embarrassment. "No harm done," he said, quickly moving his laptop out of the way and helping me gather my scattered belongings. "These chairs have been attacking customers for months. I keep meaning to mention it to Marcus, the owner, but I forget every time." He handed me my book, a worn copy of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I caught him glancing at the cover with interest. "Good choice," he said. "That one made me cry on a plane." Very embarrassing for my reputation as a stoic male. Something about his easy humor put me at ease. "It's for my book club. I'm trying to expand my reading horizons." "Book clubs are dangerous," he said with mock seriousness. "Next thing you know, you'll be discussing symbolism and metaphor like you actually understand them." I laughed my real laugh, the one Marcus had trained me to suppress, and felt a spark of connection I hadn't experienced with a stranger in years. "I'm Noelle," I said, extending my hand. "David Chun," he replied, shaking it with a firm grip. "And now that we've been properly introduced, I feel obligated to warn you about that chair. It's claimed several victims. We might have left it at that pleasant exchange, but the following Saturday, I deliberately chose the table next to his corner spot. I told myself it was because the lighting was better there, but I knew I was hoping for another conversation. David was already settled in with his usual spread of papers and coffee. This time, I was more careful navigating around the furniture, but he looked up as I arranged my things. "Survivor of chair attack number 2, he observed. "You're braver than I thought." "I like to live dangerously," I replied, settling into my seat with exaggerated caution. "What's today's literary adventure?" he asked, nodding toward the book in my hands. "Educated by Tara Westover. Have you read it?" His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "I have. Powerful book. Heavy subject matter." We fell into an easy discussion about the memoir, about resilience and family trauma and the courage it takes to build an identity separate from the one imposed on you. I found myself sharing thoughts I hadn't even fully formed yet, observations about my own journey that seemed to crystallize as I spoke them aloud. "You sound like someone who understands that process personally," David said gently, and I realized I'd revealed more than I'd intended. "I guess I do," I admitted. "Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely before you can figure out who you really are." He nodded with the kind of understanding that comes from lived experience rather than theoretical knowledge. "The rebuilding part is the hardest," he said, "but also the most rewarding." Over the following weeks, our Saturday morning conversations became a highlight I looked forward to with increasing anticipation. David was a freelance graphic designer who specialized in nonprofit organizations, detail that revealed something essential about his character. He chose projects based on meaning rather than profit, designing materials for homeless shelters, environmental groups, and organizations that supported victims of domestic violence. "Money's important," he explained one morning when I asked about his career choices, "but I sleep better at night knowing my work helps people instead of just selling them things they don't need." Our conversations ranged from books to travel to our shared love of hiking. David had grown up in Colorado and knew trails throughout the state, describing mountain vistas and hidden waterfalls with the enthusiasm of someone who found genuine joy in natural beauty. When he mentioned wanting to explore some of the closer trails now that spring was arriving, I surprised myself by expressing interest. "I've been wanting to get back into hiking," I said, which was true though I hadn't articulated it until that moment, "but I'm pretty out of practice." "The mountains don't judge," he replied. "They're just happy to have visitors." Our first hike together was tentative, almost formal, the kind of outing that could be interpreted as friendly rather than romantic, giving us both an escape route if things felt awkward. David chose an easy trail with beautiful views, packing extra water and snacks like the considerate person I was learning he was as we walked. I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't experienced around a man in years. David wasn't performing masculinity or trying to impress me with his knowledge or physical prowess. When I needed to rest, he suggested breaks without making me feel weak. When I pointed out wildflowers or interesting rock formations, he looked where I pointed with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. "You have a good eye for beauty," he commented when I stopped to photograph a cluster of columbines growing beside a stream. I think I'm just learning to pay attention again, I replied, and realized how true that was. On the drive back to town, David's coffee shop loyalty card fell from his sun visor when he flipped it down. It was nearly full of stamps evidence of all those Saturday mornings I'd watched him work at his corner table, completely unaware that fate was arranging our eventual meeting. "Looks like you're about to earn a free coffee," I observed, handing him the card. "Maybe I'll save it for a special occasion," he said, glancing at me with a smile that made my heart skip in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. That night, I wrote in my journal about the unexpected gift of meeting someone who seemed to appreciate the person I was becoming. David felt different from anyone I'd dated before, not because he was perfect, but because being around him felt effortless. I didn't have to perform or audition for his attention. I could simply be myself, and that seemed to be enough. 3 months into what we'd started calling our Saturday adventures, David asked me on what was unmistakably a date. Not the ambiguous friend or maybe more outings we'd been sharing, but dinner at a restaurant he'd carefully chosen based on conversations where I'd mentioned my favorite cuisines and dietary preferences. "I've been thinking," he said as we finished another hike, both of us sweaty and windblown and completely comfortable in each other's presence. "I'd like to take you to dinner, a real date where I pick you up and we dress up and I probably get nervous and talk too much." The honesty in his admission made me smile. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it more than I'd expected. The night of our first official date, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror trying on the fourth outfit, my anxiety manifesting in ways that surprised me. With Marcus, getting ready had been about avoiding criticism, choosing clothes that wouldn't prompt comments about being too tight, too casual, too attention-seeking. But with David, I found myself wanting to look beautiful, not to meet his expectations, but to celebrate the evening ahead. When he knocked on my door, I opened it to find him holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, not expensive roses or generic supermarket blooms, but the kind of mountain flowers we'd admired on our hikes. It was such a thoughtful, personal gesture that I felt tears prick my eyes. "You remembered?" I said, accepting the flowers. "You said they were your favorites," he replied simply, as if paying attention to what made me happy was the most natural thing in the world. At dinner, David proved true to his prediction about talking too much when nervous. He told me stories about his childhood in Colorado, his decision to leave corporate design work to freelance, his complicated relationship with his traditional parents, who still asked when he was going to get a real job. But his nervousness felt endearing rather than off-putting, evidence that this evening mattered to him. What struck me most was how he asked questions and actually listened to my answers. When I mentioned my promotion at work, he wanted to know about the challenges of managing people, what I hoped to accomplish in the role, how it felt to be recognized for my leadership abilities. When I told him about my pottery class disasters, he laughed with genuine amusement and asked to see photos of my creations. "They're objectively terrible," I warned him, scrolling through pictures on my phone. "They're not terrible at all," he said, examining each image with the same attention. He'd given my work stories. "They're personal. You can see the joy in making them." That phrase, "you can see the joy," stayed with me long after dinner ended. David had a gift for recognizing the authentic emotions beneath surface appearances, for seeing the person I was rather than focusing on performance or perfection. Our second date was even more revealing. David invited me to his apartment, not with romantic expectations, but because he wanted to cook for me. His home reflected his personality, clean but lived in, filled with books and artwork from local artists, windows full of thriving plants. That spoke to his nurturing nature. "I should warn you," he said as he moved around his kitchen with easy competence. "I'm not a fancy cook, but I make a mean pasta sauce, and I promise nothing will give you food poisoning." I sat at his kitchen island, sipping wine and watching him work. There was something deeply appealing about his unself-conscious domesticity, the way he hummed while he cooked and tasted the sauce repeatedly to adjust the seasoning. This wasn't a performance designed to impress me. It was simply David sharing something he enjoyed. During dinner, he handed me a handwritten note on simple cardstock. "I wrote this after our first date," he said, suddenly shy. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you, but I decided honesty was probably the better policy. The note was brief, but devastating in its sincerity. Noelle, thank you for one of the best evenings I've had in years. Your intelligence, your kindness, your ability to find humor in the middle of serious conversations. Everything about you feels like a gift I didn't know I was hoping for. I hope I get to discover more of who you are, but even if tonight was all we ever shared, I want you to know that you made me remember why dating can be wonderful when you meet the right person. David, I read it twice, my heart hammering against my ribs. The note was everything Marcus's love letter hadn't been: present instead of regretful, celebrating instead of diminishing, focused on connection rather than fear. This is beautiful, I managed, looking up to find him watching me anxiously. Too much too soon? He asked. Not too much, I said. Just right. That was the evening we first kissed, standing in his kitchen while his playlist provided a soundtrack of indie folk songs. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving me space to respond or retreat as I chose. When I leaned into him instead of pulling away, his arms came around me with a tenderness that made me feel precious rather than possessed. Over the following weeks, I began to understand what healthy love felt like. David never tried to change me or improve me. Instead, he seemed endlessly curious about who I already was. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, my fears, and received my answers with the kind of attention that made me feel truly seen. When I had bad days at work, he listened without trying to fix everything or minimize my feelings. When I succeeded at something, he celebrated with genuine enthusiasm. When I needed space to process emotions or spend time with friends, he supported my independence without pouting or making me feel guilty. You're not like other guys I've dated, I told him one evening as we walked through downtown after a movie. How so? He asked. You don't seem to need me to be anyone other than who I am. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. Noelle, who you are is exactly why I'm falling for you. Your compassion, your strength, your terrible pottery skills, your laugh that's way too loud for quiet restaurants. All of it. Why would I want you to be anyone else? Falling for you. The words settled into my chest like warmth spreading through cold limbs. With Marcus, love had felt like a test I was constantly failing. With David, it felt like coming home. That night, I called Emma to share the news that I was in love again. Really in love with someone who made me feel cherished rather than diminished. He sounds wonderful, she said. But more importantly, you sound like yourself again. Happy and confident and fully present in your own life. She was right. Being loved by David hadn't completed me. I'd already done that work myself. Instead, his love was amplifying the best parts of who I'd become, creating space for me to be even more authentic, more joyful, more generous with my heart. As I drifted off to sleep that night, David's note tucked safely in my nightstand drawer. I marveled at how different this felt from every relationship that had come before. For the first time in my adult life, I was being loved not despite my flaws, but as a complete person worthy of unconditional acceptance. It was exactly what I'd spent 30 years believing I didn't deserve. And it was exactly what I was finally ready to receive. David proposed on a Tuesday morning in the most perfectly ordinary way possible. We'd been together for 8 months, and the question of marriage had come up in the organic way it does when two people are building a real future together. Casual mentions of when we're married or our wedding that tested the waters without pressure. I was getting ready for work, rushing around my apartment in the controlled chaos of a 12-hour shift preparation when David emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and an expression I couldn't quite read. Noelle, he said, setting my mug on the counter. Can you sit down for a minute? Something in his tone made my heart skip. I'm going to be late for a report, please, he said gently. Just for a minute. I perched on the edge of my couch, still, in my scrubs, wondering if something was wrong. David sat beside me, suddenly looking as nervous as he had on our first official date. I've been thinking about timing, he began, running his hand through his hair in the gesture I'd come to associate with his deeper thoughts. About when the right moment is supposed to be, what the perfect proposal should look like. My breath caught as I realized where this conversation was heading. But then I realized that with you, every moment feels right, he continued. Tuesday morning coffee, Saturday hikes, Sunday evenings reading together, it's all perfect because it's real. Life and real life with you is what I want forever. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring box, opening it to reveal a vintage-style solitaire that was exactly what I would have chosen for myself if I'd had the courage to dream that specifically. I know you have to leave for work. In 10 minutes, he said, his voice soft with emotion. I know this isn't the romantic proposal you might have imagined, but I love our ordinary life together, and I want to make it official. Noelle Andrews, will you marry me? The ring was perfect, not because it was expensive or flashy, but because it reflected who I actually was, rather than who someone thought. I should be... The setting was vintage and delicate, the diamond modest but brilliant, the whole piece chosen with care and attention to my personal style. Yes, I whispered, then louder, yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, with hands that trembled slightly, and I marveled at how right it felt. Not just the physical sensation of wearing it, but the symbolic weight of choosing to build a life with someone who saw me clearly and loved me completely. I have to go to work, I said, laughing through tears I hadn't realized were falling. No, he replied, pulling me close. Go save lives. I'll be here when you get home, and we can celebrate properly. I spent my entire shift floating on a cloud of happiness, catching myself staring at my left hand during quiet moments. My colleagues noticed immediately. Nurses are trained observers, after all, and the news spread through the unit with the kind of joy that healthcare workers bring to genuinely good news. He proposed this morning? Asked Jennifer, one of the newer nurses I've been mentoring. That's so romantic. It was perfect, I said, and meant it. Nothing fancy, just real. Janet, my supervisor, pulled me aside during my lunch break. I've watched you grow so much over the past year, she said. You went from being an excellent nurse who doubted herself to being a confident leader who knows her worth. It's beautiful to see you with someone who appreciates what we've all seen in you. Her words stayed with me through the rest of my shift. A year ago, I would have needed external validation to believe I deserved happiness. Now I knew my worth independently, which made David's love feel like a bonus rather than a necessity. When I got home, David had transformed my apartment into a celebration space, not with grand gestures or expensive decorations, but with thoughtful touches that showed how well he knew me. He'd picked up takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, bought a bottle of champagne that wasn't too expensive to feel overwhelming but was special enough to mark the occasion, and created a playlist of songs that had become meaningful to us over the course of our relationship. I figured we could have the fancy celebration dinner this weekend, he said, wrapping his arms around me as I admired his preparations. Tonight felt like it should be just us. We spent the evening talking about our future with the kind of specific detail that made it feel real. We discussed where we wanted to live. David's lease was up in 3 months, and my apartment, while perfect for one person, was too small for two. We talked about timelines. Both of us wanted a shorter engagement, maybe 6 months, because we were old enough to know what we wanted and practical enough to prefer simplicity over spectacle. What kind of wedding do you want? David asked as we shared pad thai on my couch. Small, I said without hesitation. Family, close friends, somewhere meaningful, but not formal. I wanted to feel like us, not like a performance. I was hoping you'd say that, he replied with visible relief. I've been to too many weddings that felt more like productions than celebrations of love. We talked about children. Both of us wanted them, though we agreed we had time to settle into marriage first. We discussed careers, finances, the practical realities of combining two independent lives into one shared journey. But mostly, we just marveled at the fact that we'd found each other. Two people who'd both been through relationships that had taught us what we didn't want, who'd done the individual work necessary to be whole on our own, who'd met at exactly the right time to appreciate what the other offered. I need to call. Emma, I said as the evening wound down. She already knows. David admitted with a sheepish grin. I called her last week to ask if she thought you were ready, if this felt like the right time. What did she say? She said you'd been ready for months, but that you were happy enough with where things were that you weren't pressuring the timeline. She also said she'd never seen you this confident and joyful, and that anyone who could inspire that kind of growth in you was someone she was excited to call family. Emma's blessing meant more to me than I could express. She'd watched me survive Marcus, supported me through therapy, celebrated every milestone of my healing journey. Her approval of David felt like confirmation that my judgment could be trusted, that the love I was accepting was healthy and genuine. That night, as I lay in bed examining my engagement ring in the dim light filtering through my bedroom windows, I thought about the woman who cried herself to sleep 18 months earlier after Marcus's cruel birthday text. She could never have imagined this moment, not just the ring or the proposal, but the deep sense of worthiness that allowed me to receive love without questioning my deserving of it. Tomorrow, I decided I would share our news with the world. I would post the engagement announcement and let everyone in my life know that Noelle Andrews had found her person, and her person had found her. I had no idea that sharing that joy publicly would reopen a door to my past that I thought had been permanently closed. But even if I had known, I wouldn't have changed anything. I was no longer the woman who could be diminished by someone else's opinion of my happiness. I was engaged to a man who loved me exactly as I was, and that truth was stronger than any shadow from my past could ever be. I posted the engagement announcement on social media that evening, choosing a photo David had taken of me during one of our hikes. In it, I'm laughing at something he'd said, completely unself-conscious, the engagement ring catching the sunlight as I gesture with my hands. It captured everything I wanted people to see: genuine happiness, natural beauty, a woman comfortable in her own skin. The caption was simple: said yes to forever with this amazing man. Couldn't be happier to start this next chapter together. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with notifications as friends, family members, and colleagues flooded the post with congratulations. Emma was among the first to comment. So incredibly happy for you both. Can't wait to gain a brother-in-law who makes my sister shine like this. My book club friends chimed in with excited messages about wedding planning and double dates. Coworkers from the hospital shared their joy with comments about how beautiful we looked together and how much my happiness showed. Even my pottery class companions, who barely knew me outside our weekly sessions, offered sweet congratulations. The outpouring of genuine support and excitement reminded me how much my social circle had expanded since leaving Marcus behind. These weren't people who felt obligated to celebrate my milestones. They were friends who'd watched me grow and heal, who'd invested in my happiness because they genuinely cared about my well-being. David and I were curled up on my couch, reading the comments aloud to each other and laughing at some of the more enthusiastic responses when my phone buzzed with a text message notification. I glanced at the screen, expecting another congratulatory message, but my heart stopped when I saw the sender's name: Marcus Rodriguez. I hadn't heard from him since blocking his number after the birthday text 18 months earlier. Somehow he'd gotten a new number or found another way to contact me. The preview of his message showed only the first few words. Congratulations, I guess ... What's wrong? David asked, immediately noticing the change in my expression. I showed him the phone screen, my hands trembling slightly. It's Marcus. I blocked him over a year ago. David's expression grew serious, but not angry. Do you want to read it, or should we delete it without opening it? The question revealed so much about who David was as a partner. He wasn't making assumptions about what I should do or trying to control my response. He was offering me agency over my own emotional experience while making it clear he'd support whatever choice I made. I think I need to read it, I said after a moment of consideration. Not because I care what he thinks, but because I need to know if this is something we need to worry about. I opened the message with David's arm around me, drawing strength from his steady presence. Congratulations, I guess. Saw your announcement. You look happy. Can we talk? I know I don't deserve a response, but there are things I need to say. Things I should have said a long time ago. Please. The message was so different from the cruel birthday text that it almost seemed to come from a different person. Gone was the calculated cruelty, replaced by something that sounded almost vulnerable. But I'd learned not to trust my initial impulses when it came to Marcus. He'd been skilled at manipulation, at saying exactly what he thought would get the response he wanted. "What do you think?" I asked David, handing him the phone so he could read the full message. He read it carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than reactive. "It sounds like someone who's been doing some thinking," he said finally. "But it also sounds like someone who still believes he's entitled to your time and attention." "That's what I thought too," I said, relieved that David's assessment matched. My own instincts thought my phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "I know you're probably reading this with him. I know you have every right to ignore me. But I've been in therapy for 6 months and my therapist says I need to make amends to the people I've hurt. You deserve better than how I treated you. Please give me a chance to apologize properly." "He's in therapy," I said, showing David. The second message. "That's good for him," David replied evenly. "But his healing process doesn't obligate you to participate in it." David's response was so mature, so centered that it highlighted the contrast between him and Marcus even more starkly. Where Marcus had always made everything about his needs and desires, David was focused on my well-being and autonomy. Over the next hour, more congratulatory messages poured in from friends and family, but my attention kept drifting back to Marcus's texts. The rational part of my brain knew David was right. Marcus's need to make amends wasn't my responsibility. But another part of me was curious about what he might say, whether he'd gained any genuine insight into the damage he caused. "I can see you're torn about this," David said as we got ready for bed. "What are you thinking?" "Part of me wants to ignore him completely," I admitted. "But part of me wonders if hearing him out might give me some kind of closure. And what does your gut tell you?" I considered the question seriously. My gut says that the woman I was 18 months ago would have jumped at the chance to hear him apologize. But the woman I am now doesn't need his validation or his regret to feel complete. "Then trust that instinct," David said, kissing my forehead. "You get to decide how much access to give him, if any. Whatever you choose, I'll support you completely." That night, I lay awake thinking about the contrast between my current life and the woman I'd been during my relationship with Marcus. The engagement announcement had generated dozens of genuine, loving responses from people who celebrated my happiness without reservation. Marcus's intrusion felt like a shadow trying to creep back into the light I'd worked so hard to create. I thought about Dr. Chen's words from months earlier. "You don't owe your abuser forgiveness, and you don't owe them a platform for their redemption." Marcus's therapy journey was his own work to do. My healing didn't require his participation or validation. By morning, I made my decision. I would respond, but on my terms, with clear boundaries that protected the peace I'd built. If Marcus truly had changed and was genuinely seeking to make amends, he would respect those boundaries. If he hadn't changed, his reaction would tell me everything I needed to know. David brought me coffee in bed, a gesture that had become one of our favorite daily rituals. "Sleep well?" he asked, though my restless night was probably obvious. "I've decided to respond to Marcus," I said, "but I want to be very clear about my boundaries from the start." "What are you thinking?" "I'll agree to one conversation in a public place with a clear time limit. If he's really changed, he'll respect those terms. If he hasn't, I'll know quickly and can end contact permanently." David nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a plan that protects you while still giving you the closure you might need." I crafted my response carefully, reading it aloud to David before sending it. "Marcus, I'll agree to one conversation, coffee only, public place, 1 hour maximum. If you're genuinely seeking to make amends as part of your healing process, you'll understand and respect these boundaries. Let me know if those terms work for you." His response came within minutes. "Thank you. Yes, those terms are completely fair." When and where works for you? The speed and tone of his reply surprised me. The Marcus I remembered would have pushed for more time, more privacy, more access to my emotional space. This response sounded almost humble. He agreed immediately, I told David, showing him the message. No negotiation, no pushing for more. Interesting, David mused. Maybe therapy has taught him something about boundaries. We settled on meeting the following Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, Not Being There, where David and I had our history, but a busier place where I'd feel comfortable and anonymous. I chose a time that would allow me to meet Emma for dinner afterward, ensuring I'd have emotional support available immediately following the conversation as Saturday approached. I found myself less anxious than I'd expected. The woman who'd received Marcus's cruel birthday text would have spent the week obsessing over what he might say, what she might learn about herself or their relationship. But I was no longer seeking external validation of my worth or explanations for his behavior. I was simply curious about what this conversation might reveal, not about me, but about who Marcus had become and whether his claimed growth was genuine. Either way, I would walk away from that coffee shop engagement still intact, still loved, still building a beautiful future with a man who saw my worth without question. The engagement ring on my finger caught the light as I typed one final message. To Marcus, Saturday, 2 p.m., grind coffee on 16th Street. 1 hour, whatever he had to say, I was ready to hear it, not because I needed his words for closure, but because I was finally strong enough to face my past without fear of it diminishing. My future. I arrived at Grind Coffee 5 minutes early, choosing a table near the window where I could see Marcus approaching and where the bustling Saturday afternoon crowd would provide both background noise and witnesses to our conversation. I dressed, carefully not to impress him, but to feel confident and comfortable in my own skin. A simple sweater, jeans, and the hiking boots that had carried me through so many adventures with David. Marcus walked through the door at exactly 2 p.m., and I was struck by how much he'd changed in the 18 months since I'd last seen him. He looked older, more worn, as if the confident exterior that had once seemed so unshakable had developed cracks that showed the uncertainty beneath. His usually immaculate appearance was still neat, but less polished, his shirt wrinkled, his hair slightly unkempt, his eyes carrying a weariness I'd never seen before. He spotted me immediately and approached with hesitant steps, as if he wasn't sure he'd be welcome despite our agreed-upon meeting. "Noelle," he said, stopping beside the table. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I wasn't sure you would." "Sit down, Marcus," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "You said you had things to say." He sat heavily, pulling out his phone and placing it face down on the table, a gesture that might have seemed casual but felt deliberate, as if he was trying to demonstrate his full attention. As he moved, I noticed a business card slip from his shirt pocket and flutter to the floor. I caught a glimpse of it as he retrieved it. Marcus Rodriguez, freelance marketing consultant. Gone was the impressive title and company logo. Even his professional life seemed diminished. "You look good," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Happy, really happy." "I am happy," I replied simply, not offering more explanation or context. The silence stretched between us until he realized I wasn't going to fill it with nervous chatter. "I saw your engagement post," he continued. "He seems like a good guy. David, right?" "Marcus, you didn't ask to meet me to discuss my fiancé. What did you want to say?" He took a deep breath, and I saw his hands tremble slightly as he reached for the coffee cup he'd brought to the table. "I've been in therapy for 6 months," he began. "After we broke up, I went through a really dark period. I couldn't maintain relationships, couldn't figure out why every woman I dated eventually left me. I thought it was them, that I kept choosing the wrong people. I waited, saying nothing. This was his conversation to drive. It took my therapist about 3 sessions to help me see the pattern. He continued. I was recreating the same dynamic with everyone, finding successful, independent women and then systematically undermining their confidence until they became what I thought I wanted: dependent, compliant, grateful for my attention. His phone buzzed with notifications from what sounded like dating apps, but he ignored them completely, keeping his focus on our conversation. I realized I was terrified of being with someone who didn't need me, he said. Because if you didn't need me, you might choose to leave me. So I made sure everyone needed me by convincing them they weren't capable of being loved by anyone else. The admission hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to point out that his fear had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. His manipulation had eventually driven away everyone who might have genuinely loved him. But I held my tongue. This wasn't my emotional labor to perform anymore. That birthday text, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That was me at my absolute worst. I was angry that you blocked me, angry that you were moving on while I was falling apart, angry that my manipulation hadn't worked completely. I wanted to hurt you because I was hurting. And you succeeded? I said quietly. That text devastated me. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I know. God, Noelle, I'm so sorry. I've written you probably 50 apology letters over the past year, but none of them felt adequate. How do you apologize for deliberately trying to destroy someone's sense of self-worth? I don't know, I said honestly. But I can tell you that your apology isn't what healed me. I had to do that work myself. I know, he said quickly. I'm not here because I think my apology will fix anything or because I expect forgiveness. I'm here because my therapist says that making amends is part of my process, but more importantly because you deserve to know that your pain wasn't your fault. It was mine. I studied his face as he spoke, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But what I saw instead was genuine remorse mixed with a deep sadness that seemed to go beyond our relationship. What happened to you after we broke up? I asked, surprising myself with the question. He laughed bitterly. Everything fell apart slowly and then all at once. I lost my job 6 months after we broke up. Turns out treating your colleagues the way I treated my girlfriends doesn't work well in professional settings either. I've been freelancing since then, barely making ends meet. And the dating? Disaster after disaster, he admitted. I'd meet someone wonderful, things would start well, and then I'd begin the same patterns without even realizing it. The last woman I dated, Rebecca, called me out so directly it was like a slap in the face. She said I was emotionally abusive, and that she wouldn't stick around to watch me destroy her the way I'd probably destroyed other women. He pulled out his phone, showing me the screen full of dating app notifications with a self-deprecating gesture. I've been trying to fill the void with meaningless connections, but it just makes me feel more empty. I realized I don't even know how to be alone with myself, let alone be a good partner to someone else. So you started therapy. Rebecca's exact words were, "Fix yourself before you hurt anyone else." She was right. I've been working with Dr. Martinez for 6 months now, and it's been the hardest thing I've ever done. Facing the fact that I was the problem in every relationship I've ever had. I glanced at my watch. We'd been talking for 40 minutes, and I could feel my emotional energy beginning to drain. Whatever closure this conversation might provide, I was approaching my limit. Marcus, I said, I appreciate your honesty and I believe you when you say you're working on yourself. But I need you to understand something. I don't forgive you because you've apologized. I found peace with what happened between us because I had to, for my own healing. Your apology doesn't change my past, and it doesn't entitle you to a place. In my future, he nodded solemnly. I understand. I wasn't hoping for forgiveness, just for the chance to acknowledge the harm I caused and to let you know that it was never about your worth as a person. It was always about my own fears and insecurities. Then consider that message delivered, I said, gathering my purse and preparing to leave. Noelle? He called as I stood up. For what it's worth, seeing how happy you look, how confident you seem, it gives me hope that people can heal from the damage I've caused. You deserve all the happiness you've found. I looked at him one last time, this man who had once loomed so large in my emotional landscape that his opinion could devastate me with a single text message. Now he seemed smaller, more human, struggling with his own demons in ways that no longer had the power to touch me. I hope you find your peace, Marcus, I said. But find it on your own, without trying to take it from someone else. Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because Marcus had apologized, but because I'd faced him as the woman I'd become confident, boundaried, and completely clear about my own worth. The conversation had provided closure, but not in the way I'd expected. It had shown me how far I'd traveled from the woman who once needed his validation to feel hold up my phone buzzed with a text from David. How did it go? I'm here whenever you're ready to talk, I smiled, typing back. It went exactly as it needed to. See you at home. Not my apartment, but wherever David was, the life we were building together, the future that belonged entirely to us. The conversation with Marcus had ended on a note that felt complete, but as I walked to my car, I realized there were still questions swirling in my mind. Not about whether I'd made the right choice in leaving him or whether I should forgive him, but about the deeper patterns that had driven his behavior. Something about his demeanor, his obvious decline, and the glimpses of his current life made me curious about the full scope of his struggles. 3 days later, my curiosity was satisfied in an unexpected way. Emma called me Tuesday evening, her voice carrying the particular tone she used when she had information she wasn't sure she should share. I ran into someone today who knows Marcus, she said without preamble. Rebecca Martinez, remember I mentioned her before? She works at the marketing firm downtown. Rebecca. Wait, is that the same Rebecca he mentioned? The one who told him to get therapy? The very same. She recognized me from your social media posts and asked how you were doing. We ended up having coffee and Noelle. There's more to Marcus's story than what he told you. I settled into my chair, sensing this conversation would require my full attention. What kind of more? According to Rebecca, his behavior pattern goes back much further than just the women he's dated. She said he was like this at work, too charming at first, then gradually undermining colleagues, especially women, until they either quit or got pushed out. He's been fired from 3 different companies in the past 2 years. The information settled into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been unconsciously assembling. That explains the freelance consultant business card. It gets worse, Emma continued. Rebecca showed me his dating app profiles. Apparently they're still connected through some mutual friends' social media. Noelle, he's been juggling multiple relationships simultaneously, telling each woman she's special while keeping them all in different compartments of his life. My stomach turned, not with hurt but with a kind of horrified fascination. How many women? Rebecca wasn't sure exactly, but she showed me screenshots from his phone that one of his recent dates shared with her. Multiple dating apps, conversations with at least 6 different women, all happening at the same time. He's been spinning the same lines about therapy and making amends to several of them. The revelation recontextualized our entire coffee shop conversation. Marcus hadn't been sharing a private journey of growth with me. He'd been delivering a practiced speech designed to manipulate my sympathy and potentially reopen access to my emotional space. Did Rebecca say why she was sharing this information? I asked. She felt guilty, Emma replied. She said she liked you from what she'd seen on social media, and she was worried that Marcus was trying to worm his way back into your life using the therapy angle as a cover story. I thought about Marcus's phone during our conversation face down on the table, but constantly buzzing with notifications he'd ignored. At the time, I'd interpreted his restraint as evidence of his focus on our conversation. Now I realized he'd been managing multiple conversations simultaneously, giving each woman his full attention in carefully scheduled time slots. There's something else, Emma said hesitantly. Rebecca showed me some of the letters he's been writing to his various exes. They're all basically the same letter, Noelle. The same admissions, the same apologies, the same requests for closure conversations. He's running the exact same script with everyone. The letters he'd mentioned, writing me 50 apology letters over the past year, as if that demonstrated the depth of his remorse and self-reflection. But if he'd been writing similar letters to multiple women, it wasn't personal growth, it was mass manipulation disguised as accountability. How is Rebecca handling all this? I asked, genuinely concerned for a woman I'd never met, but who'd clearly been through her own version of the Marcus experience. She's in therapy too, actually. She said dating Marcus was one of those experiences that made her realize she needed to examine her own patterns of accepting unacceptable behavior. But she's doing well. She's been single for 8 months, focusing on herself, and she seems genuinely happy. There was something almost funny about the idea of Marcus, inadvertently inspiring multiple women to get therapy and improve their lives by demonstrating what they deserve to never tolerate again. That evening, I shared Rebecca's revelations with David as we prepared dinner together in his kitchen. He listened with the thoughtful attention I'd come to associate with his processing of complex information. "I'm not surprised," he said when I finished. Something about his approach felt too polished, too strategic. People who are genuinely working on themselves usually sound messier, more uncertain about their progress. "I feel like an idiot for believing him," I admitted. "You didn't believe him," David corrected gently. "You listened to him, maintained your boundaries, and walked away exactly as you planned. The fact that he was running a manipulation campaign doesn't change how well you handled the situation." David was right. I hadn't been swayed by Marcus's performance because I no longer needed his validation or approval. I'd simply been curious about his perspective, and now I had a more complete picture of what that perspective actually was. I think the most telling part, I reflected, is that even his apology was self-serving. He wasn't trying to make amends for my benefit. He was trying to manage his reputation and possibly regain access to women he'd hurt. Which is exactly why your instincts about limiting contact were so spot on, David said. You protected yourself without even knowing the full extent of what you were protecting yourself from. Over the following days, I found myself thinking about the other women in Marcus's current orbit. How many of them were having coffee shop conversations similar to mine, believing they were receiving personalized apologies and genuine insights? How many were being told they were special, that their particular pain had motivated his journey toward becoming a better person? I wasn't tempted to reach out and warn them. That would have required a level of investment in Marcus's life that I had no desire to maintain. But I felt a deep sadness for these women who were encountering him during their own vulnerable moments, potentially being re-traumatized by the same manipulation techniques that had once devastated me. The experience reinforced something Dr. Chen had taught me months earlier. Healing happens when we stop looking to our abusers for validation of our pain or confirmation of our worth. Marcus's manipulative apology tour was evidence that he hadn't fundamentally changed. He'd simply learned new ways to use emotional language to serve his own needs, but I had changed. The woman who received his cruel birthday text would have been shattered by the revelation that his apology was scripted and insincere. The woman I'd become felt only gratitude for the clarity his continued deception provided. I was exactly where I needed to be, with exactly the right person, building exactly the life that would make me happy. Marcus's ongoing struggles with authenticity and connection were no longer my concern. They were simply confirmation that I'd chosen correctly when I'd chosen to choose myself. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today, I learned that Marcus hasn't changed as much as he claimed, but I discovered that I've changed more than I realized. His continued manipulation doesn't hurt me because I no longer need anything from him. Not apologies, not explanations, not validation of my worth. I am complete without his acknowledgement of the harm he caused, and I am free without his permission to move forward." This is what healing looks like. Not the absence of past pain, but the presence of present peace. A week after Emma's call about Rebecca's revelations, I received an unexpected package at my apartment. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. Inside was a manila envelope containing what appeared to be printed emails and several handwritten letters, along with a note on professional letterhead. The note was from Rebecca Martinez herself. "Noelle, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Emma gave me your address after I explained why I wanted to contact you. I've been struggling with whether to share this information, but my therapist helped me realize that knowledge can be empowering, even when it's difficult to receive. After our conversation about Marcus, I felt compelled to gather evidence of his pattern of behavior. Not for legal reasons, but because I believe the women he's hurt deserve to understand the full scope of his manipulation. The enclosed documents are emails and drafts of letters I found on a laptop he left at my apartment. I had it professionally copied before returning his belongings. I know this might be painful to read, but I also think it might provide the complete closure you deserve. Marcus isn't just someone who hurt you and is now trying to make amends. He's someone who's made hurting women into a systematic practice. Please know that sharing this comes from a place of solidarity, not drama. We deserve to know the truth about what we survived. Rebecca, my hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. The first document was a draft email dated just 3 days before our coffee shop meeting. Subject: The Noelle Project Phase 2DR. Martinez, as we discussed, I'm ready to attempt contact with end of birthday text was obviously counterproductive, letting my anger drive my actions instead of my strategy. But I think enough time has passed that she might be open to conversation, especially now that she's engaged. I've been practicing the vulnerability approach we discussed with the other subjects, and it's been remarkably effective. Women seem to respond positively when I frame my past behavior as evidence of my own trauma, rather than as deliberate choices. The key is making them feel special for being able to inspire my growth. I'll use the therapy angle: women love a man who's working on himself. I'll acknowledge specific harms without taking full responsibility, keeping the focus on my internal struggle rather than the impact on them. If she agrees to meet, I'll assess whether she's emotionally stable enough to potentially provide character references for other situations. The engagement might actually work in my favor. Attached women often feel safer engaging with exes because they're not worried about romantic manipulation. I can use her happiness as evidence that she's healed and therefore ready to help me. Heal 2. Will report back after contact is made. I stared at the email until the words blurred, my mind struggling to process what I was reading. The coffee shop conversation hadn't been an attempt at genuine amends. It had been a calculated manipulation strategy developed with what appeared to be therapeutic guidance, though I suspected Dr. Martinez wasn't aware of how Marcus was interpreting and implementing their sessions. The phrase "other subjects" made my stomach turn. I was one of several women being systematically manipulated through identical approaches, each believing we were receiving personalized attention and genuine growth. The next document was even more disturbing: a handwritten draft of multiple versions of his apology letters, with notes in the margins. Draft 1. Too much responsibility taking. Makes me look bad. Draft 2. Good vulnerability, but need more specific details about her injuries to seem authentic. Draft 3. Perfect balance. Acknowledges harm without admitting intent. Focuses on my growth journey. Notes for individualization. Noelle, mention nursing work, family relationships, her need to feel needed. Sarah K. Focus on career insecurity. Perfectionism. Jennifer M. Emphasize body image issues. Financial stress. Rebecca. Independence threats. Trust issues from previous relationship. Clinical detachment with which he cataloged our vulnerabilities was breathtaking in its cruelty. He hadn't just hurt us, he'd studied us, documented our weaknesses, and developed targeted manipulation strategies based on our specific psychological wounds. I found myself mentioned in several other documents, email drafts discussing my progress. In responding to his contact attempts, analyses of my social media posts to gauge my emotional state, and strategies for potentially rekindling some form of relationship that could serve his various needs. One email, dated 2 days after our coffee meeting, was particularly revealing. Phase 2 successful. And responded exactly as predicted, maintained boundaries, but engaged with the conversation. Her empathy for my struggle was evident despite her caution. She's clearly done significant healing work, which makes her valuable as a potential character reference and also as validation that my methods don't cause permanent damage. The fiancé seems stable and supportive, which means she's not looking for rescue or romance. This actually makes her a better long-term contact for periodic support during difficult phases of other relationships. Recommend maintaining minimal but friendly contact. Birthday greetings, occasional check-ins framed as concern for her well-being. Build a reputation as the ex who grew and changed, to potentially rehabilitate my image in our shared social circles. Next phase. Identify which of the current subjects might be most responsive to deeper manipulation techniques. The documents painted a picture of someone who had turned emotional abuse into a refined system, complete with documentation, strategy development, and outcome assessment. Marcus wasn't just someone who'd hurt me and was now trying to make amends. He was someone who'd made hurting people into a comprehensive methodology. I called David immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I'd discovered. "I'm coming over," he said without hesitation. "Don't read any more of those alone." When David arrived, I showed him the documents with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for true crime stories. Except this wasn't a stranger's story. It was my life, my pain, reduced to data points in someone's manipulation campaign. "This is sociopathic," David said after reading through several of the emails. "This isn't someone who made mistakes and is trying to grow. This is someone who's systematized the process of causing emotional harm." "The worst part," I said, "is how it recontextualizes everything. Not just our relationship, but the breakup. The birthday text, even the apology. None of it was spontaneous or emotional. It was all calculated." David pulled me close, and I realized I was shaking. Not with fear or renewed trauma, but with a kind of primal revulsion at having been so thoroughly objectified and studied. "How many women do you think he's done this to?" I asked. "Based on what's in these documents, dozens, probably, maybe more." The scale of Marcus's manipulation campaign was staggering. He created what amounted to a database of women's vulnerabilities, developed testing protocols for different manipulation approaches, and maintained detailed records of what worked and what didn't for future reference. But as the initial shock wore off, I found myself feeling something unexpected, profound gratitude, not for the documents themselves, but for the timing of their arrival. A year ago, this information would have devastated me. It would have sent me spiraling into questions about my judgment, my ability to recognize authentic emotions, my worthiness of genuine love. Now, it simply confirmed what I already knew. I had escaped something far more dangerous than a bad relationship. I had survived a systematic campaign designed to erode my sense of self. And not only had I survived it, I'd healed from it so completely that his continued manipulation attempts had no power over me. "I want to thank Rebecca," I said finally. "This must have been difficult for her to share. What do you want to do with the information?" David asked. I considered the question carefully. The documents provided evidence of behavior that might be relevant to law enforcement or professional licensing boards, depending on Marcus's therapeutic credentials. But pursuing those avenues would mean becoming invested in his consequences, rather than focusing on my own healing. "I think I want to simply know what I now know," I said. "Marcus is dangerous in ways I didn't fully understand, but I'm safe from him because I'm no longer vulnerable to his techniques. Warning other people might feel like the right thing to do, but it would also mean making his manipulation campaign the center of my attention again." "That sounds like wisdom," David said. "You've built a life he can't touch, with people who love you genuinely. That's the best protection you could have." That night, I added one final entry to the journal I'd been keeping since therapy began. Today I learned that the man I thought I knew never existed. Marcus wasn't someone who loved me badly. He was someone who never loved me at all. I was a research subject in his ongoing study of how to break down women's boundaries and self-worth. But here's what he didn't anticipate. Some people heal so completely that they become immune to the very techniques that once destroyed them. I am no longer the woman who could be diminished by his cruelty, because I've learned to source my worth from within myself rather than from external validation. His continued manipulation attempts aren't evidence of his growth. They're evidence of mine. The fact that his sophisticated psychological campaign has no impact on my peace of mind proves that I've recovered not just from him, but from the vulnerability that made his manipulation possible in the first place. I am free, not because he's changed, but because I have. The revelation of Marcus's systematic manipulation left me with a choice I hadn't anticipated: how to process this new understanding without allowing it to poison the peace I'd worked so hard to create. For several days after reading Rebecca's documents, I found myself cycling through emotions. I thought I'd already resolved: anger at his deception, disgust at his clinical approach to causing harm, and a kind of existential vertigo at realizing how completely I'd been deceived. But alongside these difficult emotions was something else, a profound sense of my own resilience. I had survived something far more calculated and malicious than I'd realized, and not only had I survived it, I'd thrived despite it. That recognition became the foundation for a different kind of healing work. Scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Chen, bringing copies of some of the documents Rebecca had shared. Her reaction was swift and definitive. "This isn't someone who's working on himself in therapy," she said after reviewing the materials. "This is someone who's using therapeutic language to refine his manipulation techniques. If he does have a therapist, he's either lying to them about his motivations, or he's found someone who's ethically compromised. How do I process this without letting it undo the work I've done?" I asked. "The same way you've processed everything else," she replied. "By focusing on your own growth rather than his behavior. The question isn't whether Marcus deserves forgiveness, whether holding on to anger serves your continued healing." That phrase stuck with me, whether holding on to anger served my continued healing. I realized that my anger, while justified, was keeping me tethered to Marcus in a way that contradicted the freedom I fought so hard to achieve. Over the next week, I had several conversations with David about the concept of forgiveness, not as something Marcus deserved, but as something I might choose for my own peace. David, with his characteristic thoughtfulness, helped me distinguish between different types of forgiveness. There's forgiveness as absolution, he said one evening as we walked through the park near his apartment. That's about releasing someone from consequences or saying their behavior was acceptable. You don't owe him that. And then there's forgiveness as release, I said, understanding where he was leading. Exactly. That's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of someone else's actions. That kind of forgiveness isn't for him, it's for you. The distinction was illuminating. I didn't need to excuse Marcus's behavior or welcome him back into my life to achieve the internal freedom that would complete my healing. I could acknowledge the full extent of his manipulation while still choosing not to let it define my emotional landscape. The process of choosing forgiveness was more complex than I'd expected. It required me to sit with the full reality of what Marcus had done, not just to me, but to the other women who'd been subjects in his ongoing experiments in psychological harm. It meant accepting that someone I'd once trusted had viewed me as fundamentally expendable, worthy only of the utility I could provide to his manipulative agenda. But it also required me to recognize my own agency in moving forward. I could choose to be defined by what had been done to me, or I could choose to be defined by how I'd recovered from it. I could center my story around Marcus's manipulation, or I could center it around my own transformation. One evening, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by wedding planning materials, invitations, venue brochures, samples of flowers that David and I had chosen together, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could enter my marriage carrying the weight of Marcus's betrayal, constantly vigilant against manipulation and deception, or I could enter it free from the past, able to trust and be vulnerable because I knew my own worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's validation. I picked up the wedding invitation we hadn't yet sent, a simple, elegant design that reflected both David's artistic sensibilities and my preference for understated beauty. Marcus's name wasn't on the guest list, and it never would be. But I realized I'd been mentally saving him a seat at my emotional table, keeping space for my anger and hurt in ways that diminished the joy of my present life. That night, I wrote Marcus a letter I would never send. Marcus, I know now what you really are, and what you were doing during our relationship and beyond. I know about the systematic nature of your manipulation, the documentation of vulnerabilities, the clinical approach to causing emotional harm. I also know that none of it was about me. I wasn't targeted because I was uniquely flawed or vulnerable. I was targeted because I had qualities you wanted to exploit: empathy, loyalty, a desire to see the best in people. These aren't weaknesses, they're strengths that you weaponized for your own purposes. But here's what you didn't anticipate. I healed, not just from the immediate damage you caused, but from the underlying wounds that made me susceptible to your manipulation in the first place. I learned to value myself independently of external validation. I learned to trust my own judgment. I learned what healthy love looks like, and I found someone capable of offering it. I'm writing this letter not because you deserve my thoughts, but because I deserve to release them. I forgive you not because your actions were forgivable, but because carrying anger toward you would give you power over my future that you don't deserve to have. You are no longer a character in my story. You are simply someone who once caused me pain and whom I survived, and from whom I learned to protect myself and others. I wish you genuine healing, not because I care about your well-being, but because the world needs fewer people causing the kind of harm you specialized in. This is goodbye. Not the dramatic, final confrontation kind of goodbye, but the quiet release of someone who no longer has relevance to my life. I am free of you, and that freedom is the best revenge I could ever have. The act of writing the letter, even knowing I'd never send it, felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying without realizing it. I folded the pages carefully and placed them in the same drawer where I kept David's note from our third date, not because they belonged together, but because I wanted the physical reminder of the contrast between manipulation and genuine love. Next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had since receiving Rebecca's package. David noticed immediately, commenting on my smile as I made coffee in his kitchen. "You look different," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Peaceful." "I think I finally let go of the last piece," I said, leaning back against his chest, not just of Marcus, but of the anger I was holding on to about what he did. "How does it feel?" "Like I have more space for happiness," I replied, and realized how true that was. Over the following days, I found myself approaching our wedding planning with renewed joy. Every decision, from the flowers to the music to the guest list, felt like an affirmation of the life David and I were choosing together. There were no shadows from my past dimming the brightness of my future. I called Rebecca to thank her for sharing the documents, despite how difficult they'd been to process. "I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing," she admitted. But I kept thinking about how much I would have wanted to know the full truth, even if it was painful. "It was exactly what I needed," I told her. "Not to reopen wounds, but to close them completely." Understanding the full scope of his manipulation actually made it easier to let go of it. "That's what my therapist said might happen," Rebecca replied. "She said that knowledge can be healing when you're strong enough to receive it without being re-traumatized." We talked for another hour, sharing our respective healing journeys and marveling at how similar our experiences had been. Rebecca was doing well single by choice while she focused on rebuilding her sense of self, pursuing hobbies Marcus had discouraged, reconnecting with friends he'd helped isolate her from. "The strangest part," she said, "is that I'm actually grateful for the experience now. Not because it was good, but because surviving it taught me what I'm capable of. I know I'll never accept that kind of treatment again because I know what it looks like from the very beginning." Her words resonated deeply. Marcus's manipulation had been a masterclass in recognizing red flags, in trusting my own instincts, in understanding the difference between someone who challenges me to grow and someone who diminishes me to maintain control. That evening, David and I sat on his couch looking through photos from our recent hiking adventures, choosing which ones to include in our wedding slideshow. In every picture, I looked genuinely happy, not the performed happiness I'd shown during my relationship with Marcus, but the relaxed joy of someone who felt completely accepted and appreciated. "I love this one," David said, pointing to a photo he'd taken of me at a mountain summit, arms raised in triumph, face glowing with accomplishment. "You look so proud of yourself." I said. "I am. Proud of making it to the summit. Proud of becoming someone who makes it to summits," I replied. "Someone who doesn't give up on herself anymore." David kissed my temple, understanding without need for further explanation. He'd witnessed my transformation, not as someone trying to fix me, but as someone who celebrated the strength I always possessed and simply needed to rediscover. The wedding invitation sitting on his coffee table no longer felt like it was missing anyone important. Everyone who mattered would be there, people who loved us genuinely, who wanted to celebrate our happiness without agenda or manipulation. Marcus's absence wasn't a loss. It was a protection of the sacred space David and I were creating together. I had chosen forgiveness, but more importantly, I had chosen freedom. And that freedom felt like the most beautiful gift I could bring to my marriage, not the absence of a past, but the presence of a future unlimited by old wounds or lingering resentments. I was ready to say yes to forever with someone who had never asked me to be anyone other than exactly who I was. 3 weeks before my wedding, I received one final text from Marcus. This time the message was different, shorter, more direct, lacking the calculated vulnerability of his previous communications. "I know you probably hate me now," Rebecca told me she shared those documents with you. I don't blame her. I deserve whatever consequences come from my actions. But I need you to know that what I wrote about you wasn't the whole truth. Can we talk one more time? Please. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling remarkably calm. The woman who'd received his cruel birthday text would have been thrown into emotional chaos by this contact. The woman I'd become simply felt curious about what this final attempt at manipulation might reveal. David was in the shower when the text arrived, and I waited until he emerged to share it with him. "What do you think he wants?" David asked, reading the message over my shoulder. "I think he's realized that his manipulation campaign has been exposed, and he's trying to do damage control," I replied. "But part of me is curious about what he thinks he can say that would matter at this point. And what does your gut tell you about meeting him again?" I considered the question carefully. My gut says that I don't need to protect myself from him anymore because I'm not vulnerable to what he has to offer. If he wants to confess something or try one more manipulation, I'm strong enough to hear it without being affected by it. We decided together that if I chose to meet Marcus, it would be in an even more controlled environment than before. This time, we selected a location that held meaning for David and me, the park bench where we'd had our first serious conversation about our future together. If Marcus wanted to intrude on my peace one final time, he could do it in a place that reminded me of everything I gained by leaving him behind. I texted back, "One final conversation. Saturday, 10 a.m., Riverside Park, North Entrance Bench. 30 minutes maximum. This is the last time I'll agree to see you." His response was immediate. "Thank you. I'll be there." Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. The kind of perfect spring day that made everything feel possible. David walked with me to the park, not because I needed protection, but because he wanted to be nearby if I needed emotional support afterward. "I'll be at the coffee cart," he said, kissing my forehead before I walked toward the bench where Marcus was already waiting. Marcus looked worse than he had during our previous meeting. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unwashed, his eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion that speaks to sleepless nights and internal turmoil. When he saw me approaching, he stood up with the uncertain movements of someone who wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down, careful to leave space between us on the bench. "You have 30 minutes, I replied, checking my watch. "What did you want to say?" He took a shaky breath, and when he spoke, his voice lacked the calculated control I'd become accustomed to hearing from him. "Those documents Rebecca shared with you," he began, "they tell a story that's true, but not complete. Yes, I documented my interactions with you and other women. Yes, I developed strategies for emotional manipulation. Yes, I treated relationships like experiments in psychological control." I waited, saying nothing. "But what those documents don't show is how much I hated myself for doing it," he continued. "How every successful manipulation made me feel more empty, more convinced that I was incapable of genuine connection. I became addicted to the control because it was the only thing that made me feel powerful, but it was destroying me from the inside." "That sounds like something you should discuss with your therapist," I said evenly. "I stopped seeing Dr. Martinez," he admitted. "She figured out what I was really doing and terminated our sessions. She said she couldn't ethically continue treating someone who was using therapy to refine their abuse techniques." The admission hung in the air between us. Marcus had lost even the pretense of professional support for his behavior. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to know that underneath all the manipulation, there are moments when my feelings for you were real. he said, his voice breaking slightly. I know that doesn't excuse anything, and I know it doesn't change what I did to you. But I need you to know that you weren't just a subject in my experiments. You were the person who made me realize I wanted to be capable of real love. I studied his face as he spoke, looking for signs of another performance. What I saw instead was something I'd never seen from Marcus before, genuine shame mixed with what appeared to be authentic grief. The problem, I said carefully, is that I can't tell the difference between your real feelings and your performed ones anymore. Even if what you're saying is true, it doesn't change the fact that you chose manipulation over honesty, control over vulnerability, research over relationship. I know, he whispered. I know you can't trust anything I say, and you shouldn't. I've destroyed that possibility completely. Then why did you want to meet? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears I'd never seen him shed. Because I wanted to apologize for the birthday text in a way that wasn't about my healing or my needs, he said. That text was designed to destroy you because I couldn't bear the thought of you being happy without me. It was the cruelest thing I could think of to say, aimed directly at insecurities I'd spent years cataloging. The confession settled between us like a stone dropped into still water. I can see that you survived it, he continued. More than survived it, you've built a beautiful life with someone who obviously cherishes you. But I need you to know that. The cruelty of that message wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of my own emptiness. I already know that, I said simply. I figured that out in therapy long before I learned about your systematic approach to causing harm. Then, why are you here? It was a fair question, and I realized I hadn't fully understood my own motivations until that moment. Because I wanted to see if you were capable of genuine remorse, I said. Not the performative kind you've been practicing, but actual recognition of the harm you've caused without any agenda for how I should respond to that recognition. And I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before. Not the confident manipulator or the practice victim, but a broken person who'd finally run out of strategies for avoiding the consequences of his own actions. I think you might be, I said, which doesn't change anything for me, but might be important for your actual healing if you ever decide to pursue it honestly. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching other people move through the park families, with children, couples walking dogs, elderly people feeding ducks at the pond, normal people living normal lives, the kind of simple happiness I once thought was beyond my reach. I hope you have a beautiful wedding, Marcus said finally. I hope your marriage is everything mine never could have been. Thank you, I replied, and realized I believed he meant it. Will you ever be able to forgive me? He asked. I already have, I said, standing up to signal the end of our conversation. Not because you've earned it, but because I deserve to be free of the anger I was carrying toward you. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, I finished. It doesn't mean friendship or ongoing contact or references for future relationships. It means I'm no longer allowing what you did to me to limit what I do with my life. He nodded, seeming to understand that this was truly goodbye. Be well, Marcus, I said, meaning it. Get real help. Stop hurting people. Find a way to build something genuine instead of tearing down what others have built. I walked away without looking back, feeling lighter with each step. David was waiting by the coffee cart as promised, his face brightening when he saw me approaching. How was it? He asked, falling into step beside me as we headed home. Final, I said. Complete. Done. That evening, as we sat in our living room addressing the last of our wedding invitations, I realized that the park bench conversation had given me something I hadn't expected. Certainty. Not about Marcus's capacity for change or the authenticity of his final apology, but about my own complete recovery from his influence. I was marrying David not as a woman still healing from past wounds, but as someone who had transformed pain into wisdom, manipulation into discernment, betrayal into the ability to recognize and cherish genuine love. The past was finally, truly, just the past. and the future stretched ahead of us, bright with possibility and untainted by shadows that no longer had the power to dim our joy. The final conversation with Marcus created a sense of closure so complete that the remaining weeks before my wedding felt like stepping into an entirely new life. Without the background tension of unresolved past trauma, I found myself experiencing joy in its purest form, uncomplicated by fear, unfiltered by self-doubt, unlimited by the belief that happiness was something I had to earn rather than something I could simply accept. David noticed the change immediately. "You seem different since Saturday," he observed as we worked together in his kitchen, preparing dinner with the easy synchronization of two people who'd learned each other's rhythms. "I feel like I've been carrying a backpack full of rocks for 2 years, I said, and I finally set it down. "And how does it feel to walk without all that weight?" I paused in my chopping of vegetables, considering his question, like I have energy for things that matter instead of using it all to heal from things that don't. It was true in ways both large and small. I found myself sleeping more deeply, laughing more freely, engaging with wedding planning not as a woman, trying to prove she deserved celebration, but as someone genuinely excited to celebrate. The wedding planning folder that had once felt overwhelming now felt like a collection of joyful choices about how to mark the beginning of our shared future. At work, my colleagues noticed the shift too. "You're glowing," Janet told me during a staff meeting. "I mean, I know you're getting married, but this is something more than pre-wedding happiness." She was right. The confidence I'd been rebuilding over the past 2 years had crystallized into something solid and unshakable. I found myself speaking up more in meetings, taking on leadership roles that utilized skills I'd forgotten I possessed, mentoring younger nurses with the kind of generosity that comes from feeling secure in your own competence. One of the most profound changes was in my relationship with Emma, without the constant undertone of worry about my emotional state. Our conversations became lighter, more reciprocal. Instead of her supporting me through crisis after crisis, we were able to simply enjoy each other's company as sisters and friends. "I've been thinking about something," she told me during one of our weekly coffee dates. "Do you remember how you used to apologize for everything when you were with Marcus? Even for things that weren't your fault or weren't problems at all?" I did remember. I'd apologized for running late due to traffic, for having opinions that differed from his, for taking up space in conversations, for needing emotional support during difficult times at work. "You haven't apologized unnecessarily once in the past 6 months, Emma continued. "It's like you finally believe you have the right to exist without constantly justifying your presence." Her observation highlighted something I'd been feeling, but hadn't articulated. I'd stopped performing worthiness and started simply being worthy. The difference was transformative in ways that affected every aspect of my life. The wedding preparations became an expression of this newfound self-assurance. Instead of choosing vendors and venues based on what I thought would impress others or meet external expectations, David and I made decisions that reflected our authentic preferences and values. We selected a small venue that prioritized intimacy over grandeur, chose locally sourced flowers that supported environmental sustainability, and planned a ceremony that would feel meaningful to us rather than performed for an audience. The most significant decision was about our guest list. We kept it deliberately small: family, close friends, and the people who'd supported our relationship and individual growth. There was no obligation invitations, no diplomatic inclusions of people who'd been peripheral to our lives. Every person we invited was someone whose presence would genuinely enhance our joy. "This feels like the most honest guest list I've ever seen," David said as we finalized the invitations. "Everyone here has either watched us fall in love or supported us through challenges or both." 3 weeks before the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Rebecca. We'd stayed in touch sporadically since sharing our Marcus revelations, but this call felt different, more urgent. "I wanted to let you know," she said. "Marcus contacted me last week. He said he'd had a final conversation with you and that it had helped him realize he needed to stop trying to manage the consequences of his behavior through more manipulation." "What did he say?" "He apologized for involving me in his damage control efforts. He said he was withdrawing from all contact with the women he'd hurt, and that he was going to focus on genuine therapy rather than trying to rehabilitate his reputation. Do you believe him? I don't know, Rebecca admitted. But I also realized it doesn't matter whether I believe him. What matters is that I'm free of him regardless of what he does next. Her words resonated with my own experience. Marcus's future behavior was no longer my concern because my healing was no longer dependent on his choices. There's something else, Rebecca continued. I've been talking to some of the other women from his documents. We're thinking about starting a support group for people who've experienced systematic manipulation, not focused on our abusers, but on our own continued growth and helping others recognize these patterns. The idea intrigued me. Using our experience to prevent others from enduring similar manipulation felt like transforming our pain into purpose. I'd be interested in participating, I said, after my honeymoon when I have more bandwidth. That conversation reinforced something I'd been feeling throughout the wedding planning process. I was ready not just to move forward with my own life, but to help others do the same. The healing I'd done over the past 2 years hadn't just restored me to who I'd been before Marcus. It had made me stronger, wiser, more capable of recognizing and nurturing healthy relationships. The week before the wedding, David and I took a final hiking trip to one of our favorite trails. As we sat at the summit, looking out over the valley where we'd first shared our dreams for the future, I felt a profound sense of completion. Do you ever think about who you were before we met? David asked, following my gaze across the landscape. I think about who I was becoming when we met, I replied. I was already healing, already growing, already choosing myself over situations that diminished me. You didn't rescue me. You arrived exactly when I was ready to be loved well. And now? Now, I'm ready to love well in return, I said, taking his hand. Not from a place of need or fear or gratitude for being accepted, but from a place of genuine choice and authentic affection. The engagement ring on my finger caught the afternoon sunlight, but it no longer felt like the most important symbol of our commitment. The real evidence of our love was in moments like this shared silence at mountain summits, easy conversation over morning coffee, the way we navigated challenges together without losing sight of who we were as individuals. That evening, as we drove home from our hike, I realized that my wedding wouldn't just be a celebration of finding the right person. It would be a celebration of becoming the right person. The woman walking down the aisle to marry David would be someone I genuinely liked and respected. Someone whose choices I trusted. Someone capable of the kind of partnership that enhances both people rather than diminishing either. The past 2 years had taught me that healing isn't about forgetting pain or pretending damage never happened. It's about integrating difficult experiences into a larger story of growth, resilience, and the possibility of joy after suffering. I was bringing all of that wisdom into my marriage, not as baggage to be managed, but as strength to be celebrated. Tomorrow, I would marry my best friend. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be marrying him as my most authentic self. I woke up on my wedding day to sunlight streaming through the windows of the bed and breakfast where Emma and I had spent the night. For a moment, I lay still, marveling at the absence of anxiety or doubt. Instead of the frantic energy I'd expected, I felt a deep sense of rightness, as if this day had been inevitable from the moment David and I first spoke in the coffee shop. "Good morning, bride," Emma said from the other bed, her voice soft with a particular tenderness reserved for significant moments. "Good morning," I replied, stretching luxuriously. I slept better than I thought I would. No cold feet? No last-minute panic? None, I said, sitting up and looking out at the garden where our ceremony would take place in a few hours. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to feel this certain about something. The venue David and I had chosen was a historic inn surrounded by gardens that bloomed in careful succession throughout the growing season. In late spring, the space was filled with tulips and daffodils, cherry blossoms, and the early roses that would provide a backdrop for our vows. It was intimate without being precious, beautiful without being overwhelming, perfectly suited to 2 people who'd learned to value substance over spectacle. Emma and I spent the morning in unhurried preparation. She helped me with my hair, which we decided to wear simply pulled back with small flowers that matched my bouquet. a style that felt like an enhanced version of my everyday self, rather than a costume for a role I was playing out my wedding dress, hung on the closet door, and every time I glimpsed it, I felt a flutter of joy. We'd found it at a small boutique that specialized in vintage-inspired designs, elegant but not formal, detailed but not fussy, flattering in a way that made me feel beautiful rather than decorated. When I tried it on, David's sister had started crying, and I'd known immediately it was right. "Tell me about your vows," Emma said as she helped me with my makeup, keeping it natural and glowing rather than dramatic. "They're honest," I said. "Not performative or trying to sound like something from a movie. Just the truth about what David means to me and what I'm promising him." I had written them the night before, sitting in the garden of the inn while David was at his own pre-wedding gathering with his groomsmen. The words had come easily, flowing from a place of clarity I'd never accessed before. David, 2 years ago, I thought love meant earning someone's approval through perfect behavior. "You taught me that love means being accepted completely as you are, with room to grow and change and sometimes fail. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but especially when life is difficult and we have to choose each other again. I promise to maintain my own identity while building our shared life, to support your dreams while pursuing my own, to communicate openly even when it's uncomfortable. I promise to trust your love for me, even when my own insecurities whisper that I don't deserve it. I promise to keep growing into the woman you fell in love with, while giving you space to grow into whoever you're becoming. Most importantly, I promise to choose you daily not from need or fear of being alone, but from the deep joy of sharing life with my favorite person. You've shown me what healthy love looks like, and I'm grateful every day that we found each other exactly when we were both ready to love." Well, as I practiced the words in my head, I realized they represented not just my commitment to David, but the completion of my own healing journey. The woman making these promises was someone who understood her own worth, who could offer love from abundance rather than need, who trusted her own judgment about what she deserved. At noon, our small group of guests began arriving. I watched from the upstairs window as David's parents embraced my parents, as our friends found each other and began the kind of easy conversation that happens when people genuinely like each other. Everyone looked happy to be there, not dutiful or obligated, but genuinely excited to witness our commitment. "Your people are here," Emma said, joining me at the window. "Our people," I corrected, and realized how true that was. Over the past 2 years, David and I had naturally integrated our social circles, introducing friends to each other, including each other's families and holiday celebrations, building the kind of community that would support our marriage long. After the wedding day ended at 12:30, Emma helped me into my dress, zipping it carefully and adjusting the small train that would trail behind me as I walked down the garden path to meet David at the arbor where we'd exchange vows. "You look perfect," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Not perfect like flawless, but perfect like completely yourself." I looked in the full-length mirror and saw what she meant. The woman reflected there was someone I recognized, completely confident, joyful, ready for whatever came next. The wedding dress didn't transform me into someone else. It simply highlighted who I'd become. A knock on the door announced that it was time. David's best man, his brother Mark, was there to escort Emma downstairs before I made my own entrance. "He's been grinning nonstop for the past hour," Mark told me. "I've never seen him this happy." When they left, I had a moment alone, the last moment I would spend as an unmarried woman. I used it to acknowledge the journey that had brought me here, the pain of my relationship with Marcus, the devastation of that birthday text, the slow work of rebuilding my sense of self, the unexpected gift of meeting David exactly when I was, ready to be loved well. None of it felt like tragedy anymore. It all felt like necessary preparation for this moment, this choice. This man who was waiting for me in the garden below. My father appeared in the doorway, handsome in his best suit, his eyes bright with the particular emotion fathers feel on their daughters' wedding days. "Ready?" he asked, offering me his arm. "I've been ready for this my whole life," I said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with wedding fantasies and everything to do with finally becoming someone capable of the kind of love I was about to promise. We walked downstairs and through the inn to the garden entrance. I could hear the string quartet playing the processional music David and I had chosen, a piece that was beautiful but not overwhelming, creating atmosphere without demanding attention. Last chance to run. My father joked gently. The only place I'm running is toward him, I replied. He opened the garden door, and I saw our intimate gathering of family and friends arranged on either side of the garden path. But my attention went immediately to David, standing at the arbor in his dark blue suit, his face lighting up the moment he saw me dot as we walked toward him. I felt a profound sense of homecoming, not just to David, but to myself, to the woman I'd fought to become, to the life I'd chosen to build, to the future that stretched ahead of us, bright with possibility. When we reached the arbor, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in David's. The moment our fingers intertwined, I felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with being half of a couple and everything to do with being whole in the presence of someone who saw and celebrated that wholeness. "Hi," David whispered, his eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "Hi," I whispered back, and in that simple exchange was everything. All the love, all the gratitude, all the excitement for the adventure we were about to begin together. The ceremony was exactly what we'd envisioned, intimate, meaningful, focused on the commitment we were making rather than the performance we were giving. When it came time for vows, I spoke the words I'd written with steady voice and clear intention. Watching David's face as he heard my promises, his vows to me were equally honest and beautiful, full of specific references to our shared experiences and genuine commitment to our continued growth together. When he promised to love me in all the seasons of who you're becoming, I felt tears of pure joy slip down my cheeks. The moment the officiant pronounced us married, David and I kissed, with the enthusiasm of two people who'd waited not just for this day, but for each other. Our guests erupted in cheers and applause, but for a few seconds, it felt like we were the only two people in the world, that we were no longer two individuals who'd found each other. We were a married couple, ready to build something beautiful together. And as we walked back down the garden path as husband and wife, I carried with me not just David's love, but my own hard-won understanding of what I deserved and what I was capable of giving in return. It was the perfect foundation for whatever came next. 1 year after our wedding, I sit in the home David and I bought together, cozy house with large windows and a garden where we grow vegetables and the wildflowers that first brought us together. The morning light streams across the kitchen, table where I'm writing in a new journal, one dedicated not to healing from past wounds, but to documenting the joy of a life well-lived today, marks not just our first wedding anniversary, but also 3 years since that devastating birthday text. That once seemed like the end of my story. Looking back now, I can see it was actually the beginning, the moment that forced me to choose between accepting someone else's cruel assessment of my worth or fighting to discover my own value. I chose to fight, and that choice changed everything. Woman writing these words is not the same person who cried herself to sleep over a grocery store cupcake, believing she was destined to die alone. She's someone who learned that healing is possible, that growth is a choice, and that the love we accept teaches us what we believe we deserve. David emerges from our bedroom, his hair disheveled from sleep, carrying 2 cups of coffee and me. Morning ritual that has become one of my favorite parts of marriage. He kisses the top of my head before sitting beside me, reading over my shoulder without judgment or intrusion. "Writing to your younger self again?" he asks, recognizing the contemplative mood that often leads me to these reflection sessions. "Writing to anyone who might need to hear that recovery is possible," I reply. That the cruelest thing someone says to you doesn't have to become your truth. Over the past year, the support group Rebecca and I started has grown into something beyond what either of us imagined. We meet monthly, a rotating group of people who've survived various forms of systematic manipulation and emotional abuse. Some are fresh from relationships that nearly destroyed them. Others are years into their healing journey. All of them are learning the same fundamental lesson. Their abuser's assessment of their worth was always wrong. Last month, a young woman named Sarah joined our group. She'd recently escaped a relationship that sounded remarkably similar to my experience with Marcus. The gradual erosion of confidence, the isolation from support systems, the constant sense that she was failing to meet impossible standards. "I don't know who I am without him telling me," she said during our first meeting, her voice breaking. "He said I was too needy, too emotional, too much work for anyone to love. What if he was right?" I saw myself in her pain so clearly it took my breath away. But I also saw something she couldn't see yet, the strength it had taken to leave, the wisdom it revealed to seek support, the courage it required to imagine a different future. 3 years ago, I sat where you're sitting, I told her. I believed all the same things about myself. But those beliefs weren't true then, and they're not true about you now. The fact that someone treated you as if you were worthless doesn't make you worthless. It makes them someone who couldn't recognize your value. I shared my story with her that day, watching her face change as she realized she wasn't alone, wasn't uniquely flawed, wasn't destined for the isolation her abuser had predicted. By the end of the meeting, she was sitting straighter, speaking with more conviction, beginning to access the strength that had always been there but had been buried under layers of systematic diminishment. The letter I'm writing today is for Sarah and the countless others like her people who are sitting in the darkness, believing the lies they've been told about their capacity to be loved, their ability to build meaningful lives, their fundamental worth as human beings. Dear friend, in the darkness, I don't know your specific story, but I know your pain. I know what it feels like to believe that you are broken, unlovable, destined for the loneliness your abuser predicted. I know the shame of wondering what's wrong with you, why you can't seem to inspire the kind of love you see others sharing. Want you to know that everything you've been told about your unworthiness is a lie, not a mistake, not an exaggeration, but a deliberate falsehood designed to keep you small enough to manipulate. You are not too much. You are not too needy. You are not too broken to be loved well. You are not destined to die alone, no matter how many times someone has told you otherwise. The person who convinced you of your inadequacy was projecting their own fear, their own emptiness, their own inability to love authentically. They diminished you because they couldn't bear to be with someone who might eventually realize their own worth and choose to leave. But here's what they didn't anticipate. You are stronger than they calculated. You have survived their worst attempts to destroy your spirit. You are still here, still hoping, still capable of imagining a different future. That resilience is evidence of your worth, not proof of your damage. Recovery is possible. Not just survival, but genuine thriving. Not just healing from what was done to you, but discovering who you were always meant to be. I am living proof of this possibility, and so are countless others who've walked this path before you. The journey isn't easy or quick. There will be days when you doubt your own perceptions, when you wonder if you're being too sensitive or expecting too much. There will be moments when the familiar pain feels safer than the unknown territory of self-respect. But if you keep choosing yourself in therapy, in friendships that celebrate rather than diminish you, in daily practices that honor your needs and preferences, you will gradually remember who you are beneath the layers of someone else's projection. You will discover that you are funny, intelligent, capable, and deserving of love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to receive it. You will learn to trust your own judgment, to speak your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable, to take up space in the world without apologizing for your presence. And one day, sooner than you think possible, you will meet someone who sees your worth immediately and clearly, not someone who promises to love you despite your flaws, but someone who loves you because of who you authentically are. Someone who celebrates your growth instead of fearing it, who supports your independence instead of undermining it, who makes you feel more like yourself rather than less. That love exists for you. I promise you it does. But it will find you most easily when you've learned to love yourself first, not perfectly, not without ongoing work, but genuinely and fiercely and without conditions. You deserve to be chosen daily by someone who considers that choice a privilege, not a burden. You deserve to wake up beside someone who makes you feel grateful for your own life, not constantly anxious about losing their approval. You deserve to build a life that reflects your values, your interest, your dreams, not a life designed to keep someone else comfortable with your diminished presence. Start small. Choose yourself in tiny ways that feel manageable. Set one boundary. Say no to one request that doesn't serve you. Spend time with one person who makes you feel valued. Take up one hobby that brings you joy regardless of your skill level. Each small choice to honor yourself will make the next choice easier. Each act of self-respect will remind you what respect feels like. Each moment of genuine happiness will prove that joy is your natural state, not something you have to earn through perfect behavior. 3 years ago, I believed I would die alone because someone who couldn't love authentically told me I was unlovable. Today, I'm writing this letter from a home filled with genuine affection, surrounded by people who appreciate me exactly as I am. Married to someone who considers my happiness one of his primary responsibilities. This transformation is available to you too. Not because you need to become someone different, but because you need to remember who you've always been underneath someone else's lies about your value. You are worth saving. You are worth the hard work of healing. You are worth the patience required to rebuild your sense of self. You are worth love that doesn't cost you your peace, your authenticity, or your freedom to grow. Your abuser was wrong about you, but more importantly, you are wrong about you if you believe their assessment more than your own deep knowledge of your worth. You are not broken. You're not too much. You are not destined for loneliness. You are someone worth knowing, worth celebrating, worth loving well, and that truth will set you free with love and solidarity. Noelle, as I finish writing, David reads over my shoulder again, his arm coming around me in the gesture of support that has become as natural as breathing between us. That's beautiful, he says, and true. Every word of it. I hope it finds its way to the people who need to hear it, I reply, sealing the letter in an envelope I'll leave at our support group meeting tonight. It will, David says with the quiet confidence that first drew me to him. Truth has a way of reaching the right people at the right time. Tonight, we'll celebrate our first wedding anniversary by doing what we love most, hiking to a summit where we can watch the sunset and talk about our dreams for the year ahead. Tomorrow, David will return to his design work creating materials for organizations that help people heal from trauma. I'll return to my role at the hospital, where I now lead training sessions on recognizing and responding to signs of domestic abuse in our young patients and their families. We've built a life centered around love, growth, and service. The kind of life that becomes possible when you stop accepting less than you deserve and start believing you deserve everything you've always dreamed of. The cruelest text message I ever received turned out to be the greatest gift I never wanted. The catalyst that forced me to discover my own worth independent of anyone else's opinion. Marcus's prediction that I would die alone became the lie that taught me the truth about my capacity to be loved. I did not die alone. I learned to live fully, love authentically, and build a future brighter than anything I'd imagined when I was. Accepting crumbs instead of feast. And if you're reading this from your own place of darkness, believing your own version of the lies I once believed, please know your story isn't over. The best chapters are still being written, and they begin the moment you choose to believe in your own worth more than you believe in someone else's assessment of your limitations. You are not broken. You are becoming. And becoming is the most beautiful thing any of us can do.